As birth rates across the developed world continue to drop, demographers are warning that we could be facing a baby crisis in the not too distant future. Across Southeast Asia, governments are scrambling to create policies that incentivise having children in an effort to stave off the devastating economic impacts of declining ageing populations.
Even here in Australia, earlier this month, the Federal Treasurer told journalists it would be better for the economy if birth rates were higher. To discuss this a little further, we're joined by demographer and social researcher Mark McCrindle. Mark, thanks so much for joining us in studio on your Sunday morning.
Sure.
Can you tell us what the current fertility rates are in Australia and how that's changed over time and what it's expected to look like in the future?
Well, like the rest of the world, Australian birth rates are dropping and well below replacement rates, which is sort of that magic number of 2 babies per woman, which replaces the couple and sustains the population. So we're below that, down to 1.6 is our birth rate, and that's record lows. There was a little blip in COVID in 2020, but other than that, record lows, and now the lowest birth numbers that we've had in 15 years. So we really are at a low ebb, like so much of the world, in terms of births.
And I was going to ask you about what is the international experience. It's a similar trend on fertility rates on the way down?
Totally. Across the whole continent of Europe, North America, South America, even most parts of Asia, as you just mentioned, we've got below birth rate or below replacement rate births. Only in Africa and the Middle East are they above that and keeping the global population ticking along. But it will be in this century that for the first time in history, the birth rates get to replacement rate globally and maybe even a little bit below that. So we see a plateauing of global population.
Mm-hmm. Someone watching might go, well, what does it really matter? But it has huge economic and social implications to have a falling fertility rate. Can you tell me about those?
Sure. Well, with population growth comes economic growth because you've got that domestic demand, you can fill those job shortfalls, and it deals with just the ages in population. You know, Australia's on quite an ageing curve at the moment, and so it maintains diversity across the generations, ensures there's a workforce coming through and that each of the age groups are managed. And of course, as we have fewer births, even if we just lean on the migration lever, which is what's happening at the moment to sustain population, it doesn't quite do much to reduce that average age, that ageing profile.
And we know that net migration intake will fall, I think it was 518,000 last year to about 260,000 next year, which only compounds the problem. If we can talk about some of the policies that look at fertility rates, the Treasurer here wants us to have more babies, but he's ruled out a Peter Costello-style baby bonus. Former President Trump is vowing to spread out the cash in bonuses for babies if he wins office. France already spends almost 4% of their GDP on fertility, with almost every rich nation around the world considering incentives for pronatal efforts, if you like. What are some of the policies that work? What are the ones that fail? Because it seems like with the rates where they're at, they're not working.
No, well, that's right. We've got a lot of that money in Australia being put into subsidies for childcare, and it's not turning that around. The baby bonus worked because we've got the data to show that. So back in the early 2000s, the birth rate was sliding and it got down to 1.7. Now we're even below that today. But that baby bonus brought it back above replacement rates, which we hadn't seen in Australia for many decades. And so there is something about a baby bonus compared to just subsidies on childcare that make a difference for parents. A lot of parents don't need childcare. Maybe they decide that someone wants to raise a child at home, or maybe they've got grandparent care, or they work from home. And the other thing is accessing that childcare, if they even can, happens a little later, a couple of years in often to the birth of the child, whereas the baby bonus helps right at the expensive time of life as they're starting the parent years.
So should we introduce a baby bonus?
Well, I think it would have a bit more of an impact, as we've seen in the past, than the current policy. The budget showed that they're going to save over the next 5 years $500 million in unpaid parental leave that was factored in because the birth rates are below the forecast.
Yes, okay. So that aside, if we're not going to get one here, how can we future-proof economies for a lower birth rate?
Well, I think the other message that all of this shares is that we're not facing overpopulation, neither globally nor in Australia. And so to encourage people who want to start families to do so or to have another child is actually a help economically and, of course, socially amidst demographic change. And I think that message is important. But how we deal with it, well, we can deal with shortfalls through migration numbers, and that's what we're seeing at the moment. It's not the perfect solution because when we have both of the population growth levers, natural increase through births and overseas migration. It helps balance out, the growth in the population. But also it's getting more efficiency. So if we are in a low ebb of births, then we're just going to need to use technology to fill gaps that we otherwise can't. And we're going to need other ways of dealing with the age diversity, encouraging people to work later in life because we're not getting the same replacement of young people coming through. And maybe in a technology world, that's increasingly possible.
And just really briefly, Mark, Israel's doing it right. It's the one country that's held up as the bright, shining example of healthy birth rates. What are they doing differently?
Well, they're encouraging births through parental support, so there is more money available for parents. That they recognise that this child that a parent is taking on the costs of, and no one expects the government to pay for the raising of this child, it's a choice, but is going to bring a net economic benefit to that nation long term. They're going to be taxpayers and net contributors, and so they recognise that with a bit of funding of parents in various forms, or often it's tax subsidies as well, to help those parents out in those early years.
Okay, Mark McCrindle, great speaking with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.